Pine Creek was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and that's how folks liked it. Nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, the community of 5,000 prided itself on its safety, its strong values, and its deeply rooted traditions. None of those traditions ran deeper than Boy Scout Troop 414, which had been a fixture of Pine Creek since 1947. In the summer of 1982, Troop 414 consisted of 7 boys, ages 12 to 16, led by Scoutmaster Bill Harmon, a Vietnam veteran, who'd taken over leadership after his own son joined the troop 3 years earlier. The Scouts, Jason Harmon, Michael Chen, Tommy Bradshaw, Eric Washington, Kevin Reynolds, Danny Martinez, and Peter Collins, were inseparable. They'd grown up together, advanced through the ranks together, and spent countless weekends camping in the vast wilderness that surrounded Pine Creek. On the first weekend of June, they gathered at the community center to prepare for a 2-night expedition into Blackwater Forest, a stretch of protected woodland about 15 miles from town. The trip was special. It would be the last one before Jason, Michael, and Tommy, all 17 that year, would age out of the program. "Make sure you've got extra socks," Bill reminded the boys as they checked their packs. "Weather report says, clear skies, but you never know in these mountains." The boys barely listened, too busy laughing about some private joke shared between them. They'd been acting strangely excited all week, whispering in the hallways at school, passing notes in class. Parents chalked it up to end-of-year restlessness and the anticipation of summer freedom just days away. "Jason keeps saying this trip is going to be unforgettable," Sarah Harmon told her husband the night before as they lay in bed. "Have you planned something special for the boys?" Bill shook his head. "Just the usual. Hiking, camping, survival skills. They seem worked up about something, though." "Teenagers," Sarah said with a smile, turning off her bedside lamp. On the morning of June 4th, the Scouts and their Scoutmaster piled into Bill's van and Mrs. Bradshaw's station wagon for the drive to the trailhead. Parents waved goodbye, expected to see their sons on Sunday evening, dirty and exhausted but filled with stories of adventure. No one noticed the extra weight in Jason's backpack or the old book Michael had hidden inside his sleeping bag. No one thought twice about Tommy's unusual pendant, a strange metal symbol on a leather cord, which he normally never wore. No one spotted the 3 identical compasses the older boys carried, compasses that didn't point north. As the cars disappeared, around the bend, Mrs. Reynolds felt a sudden chill despite the warm June morning. She crossed her arms over her chest and turned away, telling herself it was nothing. Just a cloud passing briefly over the sun. The forecast had promised clear skies, but as Bill and the boys reached the trailhead, a strange mist hung in the trees, not quite fog, thinner, with an odd shimmering quality, like heat rising from summer pavement. Bill frowned at it. "Maybe we should postpone," he said, studying the forest. "Something doesn't feel right." "It's just a little mist, Dad," Jason said, already shouldering his pack. "It'll burn off once the sun gets higher." Bill hesitated, but the boys were already moving toward the trail, eager to begin. He sighed and followed, making a mental note to set up camp earlier than planned if the weather worsened. The group passed the trailhead sign, Blackwater Forest, North Ridge Trail, and within minutes, the parking lot had disappeared behind them, swallowed by dense pines and the strange, glittering mist. The first day passed uneventfully. The boys hiked 5 miles along the ridge trail, stopped for lunch at Beaver Creek, and continued another 3 miles to a clearing that Bill had used for camping dozens of times before. They pitched their tents, gathered firewood, and cooked hot dogs and beans for dinner. As darkness fell, they sat around the campfire telling ghost stories, a Scout tradition. "My turn," Jason said, his face serious in the flickering firelight. "This isn't made up, though. It's something that actually happened in these woods, back in 1932. The younger boys leaned forward. Even Bill, who'd heard every local legend, found himself curious. "There was a group of loggers working these hills," Jason began. 7 men. They found a cave system that wasn't on any map, and inside they discovered something strange. A room with walls made of some kind of metal with symbols carved into it. Not English, not any language anyone recognized. Aliens, whispered Danny, the youngest. Jason shook his head. The loggers didn't know what it was, but they knew it was valuable. They decided to keep it secret, come back with equipment to remove whatever it was. But that night there was a storm unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Not rain and thunder, lights in the sky, the ground shaking. When it was over, the loggers had vanished, all 7 of them. What happened to them? Eric asked. Nobody knows, Jason said. But 50 years later to the day, a hiker found their names carved into a tree, along with a set of coordinates. When rangers checked those coordinates, they found the loggers' equipment, looking like it had been abandoned the day before. No rust, no decay. The boys exchanged glances. Bill noticed Tommy subtly touch the strange pendant around his neck. Good story, Bill said, standing up. But I think it's time to turn in. We've got an early start tomorrow. As the boys brushed their teeth at the edge of camp, Bill overheard Jason whisper to Michael, "Midnight. Meet at the big oak. Bring the map." Bill frowned but said nothing. The boys were planning something, probably a midnight hike or prank on the younger scouts. He'd stay alert and catch them before they got too far. After everyone retired to their tents, Bill lay awake, listening. The forest was unusually quiet. No crickets, no distant owls, not even the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Just silence, broken only by the occasional whisper from the boys' tents. At 11:45 p.m., Bill heard movement. He waited a few minutes, then silently unzipped his tent. In the moonlight, he could see 3 forms, Jason, Michael, and Tommy, gathering by the large oak at the edge of the clearing. They had their backpacks and were studying something that looked like an old parchment. Bill was about to step out and confront them when he noticed the other tent unzipping too. The younger boys were awake, also watching. "What are they doing?" Kevin whispered to Eric. "I don't know, but they said we could come along if we wanted," Eric replied. "They found something cool they want to check out." Bill stayed silent, watching as his son and the 2 older boys motioned for the younger ones to join them. All 7 scouts gathered under the oak tree, examining the parchment by flashlight. Bill decided to let them go a short distance. They wouldn't get far in the dark, and perhaps this would be a good lesson about nighttime navigation. The boys set off into the forest, Jason in the lead with a compass in hand. Bill waited until they were about 50 yards ahead, then quietly followed. The mist had returned, thicker now, with that same peculiar shimmer. The boys' flashlights created eerie, distorted halos in the fog. They walked for about 20 minutes, moving deeper into the forest than Bill had ever taken them, following a route that didn't appear on any trail map. Suddenly, the boys stopped in a small clearing. Bill crouched behind a fallen log about 30 yards away, watching. Jason removed something from his pack, the book Michael had been carrying earlier, and opened it. Tommy took off his pendant and held it up in the dim moonlight that filtered through the mist. The pendant began to glow faintly, a pulsing blue light that seemed to intensify as Tommy turned slowly in a circle. "There," Tommy said, pointing to the northeast. "The readings match. This is the place." The boys gathered, in a tight circle. Jason began reading from the book, strange syllables that didn't sound like any language Bill had ever heard. As he read, the mist around them began to swirl, gathering density, the shimmer intensifying until it almost hurt to look at it. Bill stood, suddenly alarmed. "Jason," he called, stepping out from his hiding place. "Boys, get back here right now." The scouts turned toward him, surprised. Jason closed the book. "Dad, how long have you been—" Bill never heard the rest of the sentence. The swirling mist between them suddenly collapsed inward, like water down a drain, forming a vortex of brilliant, scintillating light. The ground trembled. A high-pitched whine filled the air, quickly rising beyond the range of human hearing. Bill staggered backward, thrown off balance by the shaking earth. He glimpsed the boys' faces, frozen in expressions of surprise and fear, illuminated by intense blue light. And then they were gone. The vortex closed with a sound like thunder, and the forest was plunged into darkness and silence once more. Where the 7 scouts had stood, there was now only empty air, undisturbed, as if they had never been there at all. "Jason!" Bill screamed, rushing forward. "Jason!" He reached the spot where the boys had been, frantically searching the ground, the nearby trees, calling their names until his voice gave out. Nothing. No footprints leading away, no disturbed vegetation, no sign that 7 boys had stood in that clearing moments before. Only the pendant remained, lying on the ground, no longer glowing, its metal surface cold to the touch. By dawn, Bill had searched a mile in every direction. Exhausted and desperate, he ran back to the campsite hoping, beyond hope, that the boys had somehow returned, that it had all been an elaborate prank. The camp was exactly as they'd left it. 7 tents, backpacks neatly stored, food hanging from a tree to keep it from bears. Everything in place, except for the boys themselves. Bill fumbled for the emergency radio in his pack, his hands shaking so badly he could barely operate the dials. When he finally made contact with the ranger station, his voice was barely recognizable. "My scouts," said. "All 7 of them. They're gone." Within hours, the forest was swarming with searchers. Police from Pine Creek and neighboring towns, forest rangers, volunteer firefighters, and dozens of local residents spread out through Blackwater Forest. Helicopters circled overhead, search dogs sniffed the ground, and teams with bullhorns called the boys' names from sunrise to sunset. Bill led them to the clearing where he'd last seen the scouts, but there was nothing to find. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, no evidence of the swirling light or the terrible sound. Some of the searchers exchanged skeptical glances. Had Bill Harmon really seen what he claimed? Or had he fallen asleep while the boys wandered off? "We found the campsite intact," Officer Daniels told Sarah Harmon that evening as she sat white-faced on her living room sofa. No signs of struggle, no indication they were forced to leave. Their sleeping bags were still in their tents. "And my husband?" Sarah asked. "Mr. Harmon is still out there with the search teams. He's distraught. Keeps insisting the boys disappeared right in front of him, in some kind of light." Sarah closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Bill wouldn't make that up. He wouldn't lose track of those boys. Not our son. Not any of them." For 5 days, the search continued. The story made national news. 7 Boy Scouts and their scoutmaster, missing in the Appalachian wilderness. Reporters descended on Pine Creek, interviewing parents, classmates, anyone who might have insight into why the boys would wander off, or who might have taken them. On the 6th day, search teams found Bill's van and Mrs. Bradshaw's station wagon still parked at the trailhead, confirming at least that the group had entered the forest as planned. Inside Jason's school locker, police discovered notebooks filled with strange symbols, similar to those on Tommy's pendant. In Michael's bedroom, they found books on astrophysics, quantum mechanics, and something called dimensional theory, advanced texts that his parents hadn't even known he was reading. "We think the older boys may have planned this," Officer Daniels told the assembled parents on day 7. "We found evidence suggesting they were experimenting with unconventional ideas. They may have convinced the younger boys to run away with them." "That's ridiculous," Michael's father said. "My son wouldn't leave without telling us. None of these boys would." "And what about Bill?" Sarah demanded. "You think he's part of this conspiracy too? You think he'd leave his wife and daughter behind?" The officer had no answer for that. Bill Harmon was still in the forest, refusing to leave, sleeping in his tent at the boys' campsite, venturing out each day to continue the search alone. The official search was scaled back after 2 weeks, then formally suspended after a month. No bodies, no evidence of foul play, no sightings of 7 boys or their scoutmaster anywhere in the country. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist. The first anniversary of the disappearance came and went. The parents established a foundation, offering a substantial reward for information. They appeared on television shows, put up billboards, consulted psychics and private investigators. Nothing yielded any leads. Bill Harmon, once a respected member of the community, became a ghost-like figure, gaunt and hollow-eyed. He lost his wide-awake job at the hardware store, spent his days combing through Michael's physics books and Jason's notebooks, trying to understand what his son had been planning. Sarah stood by him, but even she began to wonder if Bill's account of that night, the swirling light, the sudden vanishing, was a fabrication his mind had created to cope with the inexplicable. By the 5-year mark, most of Pine Creek had moved on. The tragedy was still remembered, still marked with a yearly candlelight vigil, but life continued. 4 of the 7 families eventually moved away, unable to bear the constant reminders of their loss. The Harmons stayed, largely because Bill refused to leave. He'd converted their garage into what Sarah privately called his obsession room, walls covered with maps of Blackwater Forest, photographs of the boys, printouts of scientific articles, about wormholes and parallel universes, strings connecting points that made sense only to him. "You need help, Bill," Sarah finally said, 10 years after the disappearance. "This isn't healthy. Jason would want us to live our lives." "He's not dead," Bill insisted. "None of them are. I saw what happened. They didn't die. They went somewhere." In 1997, 15 years after the disappearance, Bill received a letter, postmarked from a town in New Mexico he'd never heard of. Inside was a single sheet of paper with nothing but geographic coordinates written on it. Coordinates for a location deep in Blackwater Forest, miles from any official trail. There was no signature, no return address. Bill took the coordinates to the forest ranger station. The head ranger, Jim Cooper, had been new to the job when the scouts vanished, but he remembered the case well. "These coordinates," Cooper said, studying the paper. "They're in a part of the forest that was logged back in the 30s. Nothing out there now but second-growth trees. No camps, no landmarks." "Will you take me there?" Bill asked. Cooper hesitated, then agreed. The following day, they hiked 6 hours through dense forest, Cooper checking their position against GPS until they reached the exact spot indicated by the mysterious coordinates. There was nothing there, just trees, underbrush, and the remains of an old logging road barely visible beneath decades of growth. "I'm sorry, Bill," Cooper said. "Whoever sent you on this wild goose chase?" "Wait," Bill interrupted, staring at the ground. "Look at this." Partially buried in the soil was a small metal object. Bill knelt and carefully dug it out, a Boy Scout compass, its surface tarnished, but intact. On the back, engraved in neat letters, "Property of Jason Harmon." Cooper took the compass, examining it with a frown. This could have been here for years, or someone could have planted it recently. "Who would do that?" Bill demanded. "And why these exact coordinates? This isn't a coincidence." They searched the area thoroughly but found nothing else. Bill took the compass home, adding it to his wall of evidence, a tiny flame of hope rekindled. For the next decade, he returned to that spot at least once a month, searching in ever-widening circles, convinced that Jason was somehow communicating with him, sending him clues. In 2012, 30 years after the disappearance, Pine Creek held a memorial service. The missing scouts were officially declared dead, though their bodies had never been found. 6 of the 7 families attended. Bill Harmon did not. He was in the forest, as he was every June 4th, sitting in the clearing where he'd last seen his son, waiting for something he couldn't name. Sarah had learned to live with her husband's obsession. Their daughter, born 2 years after Jason vanished, had grown up in the shadow of a brother she'd never met, with a father whose attention was perpetually divided between the present and the mysterious past. Now in her 20s, she had moved across the country, returning only for obligatory holiday visits. "You've lost 2 children," Sarah told Bill after the memorial. "One to whatever happened in those woods, and one to your inability to let go." Bill didn't argue. He knew she was right, but he couldn't explain the certainty he felt, the bone-deep conviction that the boys weren't dead, that the answer was still out there, waiting to be found. Life in Pine Creek continued. The hardware store where Bill had worked became a cafe. The community center was renovated. The old Boy Scout meeting room converted into a computer lab. Most of the people who remembered the Scouts firsthand had died or moved away. The story became local legend, told to tourists and new residents as part of the town's tragic history. Some versions blamed a kidnapper, others a wild animal attack. A few mentioned Bill's strange account of swirling lights and sudden vanishing, usually with knowing looks that suggested the storyteller believed grief had driven the Scoutmaster mad. In the spring of 2022, Jim Cooper retired after 25 years as head forest ranger. His replacement was a woman named Maya Rodriguez, newly transferred from California. During her orientation, Cooper showed her the file on the missing Scouts. "It's been 40 years, he told her, but locals still talk about it. You'll get questions, especially around the anniversary in June. And there's one other thing." He hesitated. "Bill Harmon. He was the Scoutmaster. He still comes out here, looking for his son. He's harmless, but he knows these woods better than anyone now. If you see an old man with a white beard and a walking stick, that's Bill." Maya nodded, studying the file. 7 school photographs stared back at her, boys frozen in time, forever young. She felt a pang of sadness for lives cut short, for the families left behind with no answers. 3 weeks later, Maya was doing a routine patrol of the North Ridge area when she noticed something odd. A large oak tree, at least 100 years old, had fallen across the trail during recent storms. As she assessed the damage, planning how to clear the path, she noticed markings on the trunk. Not natural patterns in the bark, but deliberate carvings. Moving closer, she realized they were names, etched deep into the wood. Jason Harmon, Michael. Chen Tommy Bradshaw, Eric Washington. Kevin Reynolds. Danny Martinez, Peter Collins. The names were arranged in a perfect circle, and in the center was carved a date, June 4th, 1982. Maya stared at the carvings, a chill running down her spine despite the warm spring air. The fallen oak had split when it hit the ground, revealing the inside of the trunk. The names weren't carved into the bark. They were inside the wood itself, as if the tree had grown around them. She took out her phone, photographed the carvings, then checked the GPS coordinates of her location, consulting her Forest Service map. She realized she was nowhere near the area where the Scouts had disappeared. This part of the forest had been clear-cut in the 1950s. Most trees here were less than 70 years old. But this oak was older, much older, predating the logging operations. When Maya returned to the ranger station, she immediately pulled the file on the missing Scouts. The names matched exactly. 7 boys who had vanished without a trace. 40 years earlier, she called Jim Cooper, describing what she'd found. "That's impossible," Cooper said. "Those carvings can't be inside the tree, and even if someone carved the names recently, how did they get them inside the trunk?" "I don't know," Maya said, "but I'm looking at these carvings and they look fresh. The wood isn't weathered. It's like they were carved yesterday." "Don't touch anything else," Cooper told her. "I'll call Pine Creek PD and the FBI field office. And Maya, find Bill Harmon. He needs to see this." Bill was 72 now, his once sturdy frame bent with age and the weight of decades spent searching. When Maya found him at the small cabin he'd built at the edge of town, Sarah had left years ago, unable to compete with the ghost of their son. He listened to her story with a stillness that spoke of a man accustomed to false hopes. But when she showed him the photographs, his hands trembled. "Inside the tree," he whispered. "You're sure?" "Yes," Maya said. "The tree fell and split open. The names are carved into growth rings that would have formed decades ago. It's not scientifically possible." Bill's eyes filled with tears. "Take me there. Now." By the time they reached the fallen oak, the area had been cordoned off with police tape. 2 Pine Creek officers stood guard while a forensics team from the county examined the carvings. Bill pushed past them, ignoring their protests, and fell to his knees beside the split trunk. He ran his fingers over the names, lingering on his sons. "These weren't here before," one of the officers said. "This tree fell 3 days ago. We had a crew out here assessing storm damage, and nobody reported any carvings. They weren't visible until the tree split," Maya explained. "They're inside the wood." The lead forensics technician shook his head. "That's not possible. These carvings would have had to be made around 40 years ago based on the growth rings, but they'd be distorted, overgrown. These are perfect, precise, and the tool marks are fresh, like they were carved hours ago." Bill wasn't listening. He was studying the arrangement of the names, the perfect circle they formed. In the center, below the date, was a small symbol, a design he recognized. "The pendant," he said suddenly. "Tommy's pendant had this symbol." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. Unwrapping it carefully, he revealed the metal pendant he'd found in the clearing 40 years before, after the boys vanished. The symbol matched exactly. "Mr. Harmon," the forensics tech said, "we're going to need to take that as evidence." But Bill wasn't finished. He noticed something else. Tiny marks around the outer edge of the circle of names. Looking closer, he realized they were coordinates, the same format as those he'd received in the anonymous letter years ago, but different numbers. He quickly wrote them down. "These are only about 2 miles from here," he said, showing Maya. "Northeast." The police insisted on handling the investigation officially, calling in FBI agents who specialized in cold cases. But Bill knew they wouldn't move quickly enough. That night, after everyone had left, he returned to the fallen oak with a flashlight. The names were still there, unchanged. He touched Jason's name one more time, then set off into the forest, following the coordinates he'd memorized. The May night was warm, the forest alive with the sounds of insects and nocturnal animals. Bill moved slowly, his old legs protesting the uneven terrain. But his sense of purpose had never been stronger. After an hour of careful navigation, he reached the coordinates, a small clearing surrounded by ancient pines, untouched by the logging operations that had shaped much of the forest. In the center of the clearing stood a single oak tree, massive and gnarled, its trunk at least 10 feet in diameter. Bill approached it cautiously, playing his flashlight over the bark. There were no carvings visible, but as he circled the tree, he noticed a thin seam in the trunk, as if the tree had split at some point and grown back together. The seam ran from the ground up about 7 feet, just wide enough to slide a hand into. Without hesitation, Bill reached into the gap. His fingers touched something smooth and cold, metal, not wood. He felt along the object, tracing its contours until he found what seemed to be a latch or handle. Taking a deep breath, he pulled. The seam widened silently, opening like a door. Inside was not the solid wood of a tree trunk, but a space, a perfectly circular room, about 12 feet in diameter, with walls made of some smooth, silvery material that caught and reflected his flashlight beam. The floor was the same material, seamless, with no visible joints or fastenings. Bill stepped inside, his heart pounding. The room was empty except for 7 small pedestals arranged in a circle, each about 3 feet high. On top of each pedestal was a Boy Scout compass, identical to the one Bill had found years ago, except these were pristine, untarnished. In the center of the circle of pedestals was a raised platform. On it sat a book, the same book Jason had been reading from the night the boys disappeared. Bill approached it slowly, afraid to touch it, yet unable to resist. The book was open to a page covered with the strange symbols he'd seen in Jason's notebooks, in Tommy's pendant, in his own dreams for 40 years. As he stared at the symbols, they began to shift before his eyes, rearranging themselves into English words. The page now read, "The door opens once every 50 years. Those who enter exist in both places at once, until the cycle completes. We have waited. We have grown. We will return when the circle closes." The ground beneath Bill's feet began to tremble. The silvery walls of the room started to shimmer with that same strange quality he'd seen in the mist 40 years ago. A high-pitched whine filled the air, growing in intensity. Bill should have been afraid, but he felt only a profound sense of rightness, of completion. He understood now. The boys hadn't died. They hadn't been kidnapped or lost. They had found something, a doorway, a passage, and they had gone through it, willingly, curiously, as boys with an adventure before them. And somehow, impossibly, they had continued to exist, to grow, in another place, another time, perhaps another dimension altogether. The whine reached a crescendo. The shimmering walls collapsed inward, forming the same vortex of brilliant light Bill had seen take his son. This time, he did not fight it. He stepped forward, into the light, and as it enveloped him, he saw them. 7 figures emerging from the brightness, no longer boys but men, their faces both familiar and transformed by decades he hadn't witnessed. "Dad," said the tallest figure, his voice deeper than Bill remembered, but unmistakably Jason's. "You found us." The vortex expanded, filling the room, spilling out into the forest beyond. For a brief moment, anyone looking toward that part of Blackwater Forest would have seen a column of blue-white light reaching from the ground to the sky, pulsing once, twice, then vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. The next morning, Maya Rodriguez responded to reports of the strange light. She found the ancient oak tree, but there was no seam in its trunk, no door, no indication that anything unusual had occurred. The tree was solid, whole, as it had been for centuries. 2 days later, Sarah Harmon received a package. Inside was Bill's walking stick, Jason's compass, and a letter. The handwriting was Bill's, but steadier, stronger than it had been in years. "Sarah, I found them. Or rather, they found a way to reach me. I can't explain what happened. I'm still learning to understand it myself. The boys discovered something in 1982, something not from our world. A doorway that appears cyclically, connecting different points in time and space. When they activated it accidentally, they were pulled through. On the other side, time moves differently. For them, only 10 years have passed while we've experienced 40. They've been trying to communicate, to find a way back, but the doorway only opens fully every 50 years. The carvings in the tree, the compass I found, these were messages, attempts to reach across. They've learned to manipulate the connection, but couldn't fully cross over until now. I've gone to join them, Sarah. Not just to be with Jason, but because they need help. What they found is bigger than we can imagine, a network of these doorways across time and space, some natural, some constructed by others. The boys have become explorers, cartographers of these passages. There are more people like them, from different times, different places, all brought together by these intersections. I know this sounds impossible. I know you may not believe me. But look at the compass. It doesn't point north anymore. It points to the next doorway. I don't know if I'll be able to return, or if you'd even want to follow. But I needed you to know that our son is alive. That all of them are alive, and that I'm with them now. We are explorers, Sarah, mapping the connections between worlds. And sometimes, when the conditions are just right, We'll leave you a sign that we're still here, still thinking of home. All my love, across all distances, Bill. Sarah put down the letter, picked up the compass. The needle spun lazily, then settled, pointing not north but toward Blackwater Forest. She closed her hand around it, feeling its weight, solid and real and impossible. In the decades that followed, hikers in Blackwater Forest occasionally reported strange mists, unexplained lights, and in one case, a group of men in outdated clothing who appeared on a trail, nodded politely, and vanished around a bend, never to be seen again despite the trail being a straight path with no turnoffs. Rangers investigated each report but found nothing conclusive. Except for Maya Rodriguez. Every June 4th, she'd find a fresh carving on a different tree, a small symbol, the same one from Tommy's pendant, sometimes accompanied by a set of coordinates. She'd follow them, alone, and sometimes she'd find items, a modern camera containing photographs of landscapes no one recognized, journals filled with descriptions of places that didn't exist, sketches of creatures that couldn't possibly be real. She kept these findings to herself, building her own wall of evidence, her own map of impossibilities. And sometimes, on clear nights when the stars seemed unusually bright, she'd sit in the clearing where the ancient oak stood and listen to the forest. Most nights, she heard only the usual sounds: wind in the leaves, animals in the underbrush, the distant call of owls. But occasionally, very occasionally, she'd hear voices, men's voices, talking and laughing, growing louder for a moment as if passing nearby, then fading away into silence. Not ghosts, she thought. Travelers, moving between worlds that touched but never quite connected, leaving traces of their passing for those who knew where to look. In time, Maya came to understand what Bill had learned, that the world was stranger and vaster than most people ever realized, that what we perceive as solid and unchangeable is merely one layer of a reality that folds and unfolds in ways we can barely comprehend, and that sometimes what looks like an ending is merely a different kind of beginning, a door opening to possibilities beyond imagination, waiting for those curious enough, brave enough, or perhaps simply lucky enough to step through.